I'm fired up. I'm fired up about this. I'm a little concerned, frustrated, because we got some horsepower on this panel. We've only got about 40 minutes. So I'm going to do some intros. I'm going to volley the first wave of questions, and then you guys start thinking about what you want. But we're taking a look at the Navy SEALs today. I'm an Air Force guy who's introducing a Navy SEAL panel in a hotel with a swimming pool down there that matters. 80 years ago, one evening in November 18th, 1942, a group of dudes go into that pool, close the door, place guards so that a guy named Jack Taylor can put on what amounts to a World War I gas mask with some extra rubber tubing and climb into the water to demonstrate a new technology of underwater breathing that creates no bubbles. And as this former Hollywood dentist, of all people, was swimming below the water, these people looked at each other and said, I think the game has just changed. And that set the stage. That technology set the stage for underwater demolition team technology that eventually, in the same speech as the moonshot speech by John F. Kennedy, we will send a man to the moon and return him to Earth, right, by the end of the century. That same speech, Kennedy announces the establishment of a new type of special warfare, new type of special warrior, special operations warrior that can operate on the sea, air, and land. And so begins the birth of the Navy SEALs. Started in this stinking hotel 80 years ago. Well, what was also birthed there was a tribe, a culture. And I'm a big fan of creeds. Your organization, your profession, there are creeds that define who we are to each other, to ourselves, to the nation. And the creed for the Navy SEALs starts this way. In times of war or uncertainty, there's a special breed of warrior ready to answer the nation's call, a common man with an uncommon desire to succeed. Forged by adversity, he stands alongside America's finest special operations forces to serve his country, the American people, and protect their way of life. I am that man. That's the first stanza of the SEAL Creed. Well, we've got some of those special warriors here today. They come from a lot of, over time, come from a lot of different dimensions and facets of the SEAL community. So I'm going to introduce them quickly before we dive into questions. Mr. John Wolfram, Bud's class of 44. Now we're going way back. These are the early days because there's now over 350 Bud's classes. A Navy frogman, twice deployed with the UDT-11 team to Vietnam, wounded on his second tour. Selected as a member of the recovery and operations for Apollo 10 and 11, and a sea anchorman for, check this out, for the landing of the Apollo 11 craft when it splashed back to Earth. So when you see the splashdown footage, John Wolfram is the first cat in the water to secure that vehicle and set up the flotation, and he's the one to knock on the window to welcome the astronauts back to Earth. Now, for you in the back, I'm going to zoom in a little bit because this may be the coolest SEAL pose ever. Check that out. As if NASA said, hey, has anybody found our space capsule? He's like, I got it. I wrangled it right here. Just so, John, I know there's the story behind the hippie flower boldly emblazoned on that wetsuit that caught the nation's attention. But he was on splashdown, the first frogman into the water to welcome Aldrin, Collins, and Armstrong from outer space. Next panelist is Captain Chris Cassidy. Hero shot here for Mr. Cassidy. I love this picture because it so clearly is one of those that's, hey, Chris, what do you do for a living? And you say, well, I could tell you, but I'd have to kill you. That's the kind of picture we've got here. Do you remember where this photo was, if you can even say? Bagram Airfield. Okay, that was Bagram. Chris Cassidy, Bud's class of 192 now. Served as a SEAL for 10 years, 4 combat deployments, including his time as a Platoon Commander for SEAL Team 3, as the first unit into Afghanistan pursuing high-value targets 2 weeks after September 11th. He's the panel's only SEAL delivery vehicle driver with over 200 hours of underwater pilot time. And I love this, specialization in non-compliant ship boardings. That sounds very polite. Can we board your ship? No, we don't want you to. we're coming on board anyway. So I like that. And then if you've ever had one of those, I thought I've done a lot with my life moments, I'm going to crush that, because Chris Cassidy also got an advanced degree at MIT, became an astronaut with multiple missions on the Space Shuttle, Soyuz rocket, 10 spacewalks, eventually commanding the International Space Station and becoming the lead scientist at NASA, becoming the second SEAL into space, the 500th person in space, and taking a picture of himself in space that in 2013 was voted the best selfie of the year. And was involved in perhaps the coolest marketing ad ever. Nothing beats an astronaut except a Navy SEAL astronaut. You win every argument there. He is now the president and CEO of the National Medal of Honor Museum Foundation. Finally, Master Chief Ed Byers. He is a SEAL's SEAL and the tip of the spear warrior, Bud's Class 242. He is a Navy corpsman who became a legendary SEAL, 11 deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, 9 combat tours, 5 Bronze Stars with Valor, 3 Navy commendations, 2 with Valor, 2 Purple Hearts, countless other awards and recognitions to include, and I quote, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, at the risk of his life, above and beyond the call of duty, as a hostage rescue force team member in Afghanistan in support of Operation Enduring Freedom from 8 to 9 December 2012. As the rescue force approached the target building, listen to this story. An enemy sentry detected them and darted inside to alert their fellow captors. The sentry quickly reemerged, and the lead assaulter from our team attempted to neutralize him. Chief Byers, with his team, sprinted to the door of the target building. As the primary breacher, he stood in the doorway, fully exposed himself to enemy fire while ripping down 6 layers of heavy blankets fastened to the inside ceiling and walls to clear a path for the rescue force. The first assaulter pushed his way through the blankets and was mortally wounded by enemy small arms fire from within. But Chief Byers, completely aware of the imminent threat, fearlessly rushed into the room and engaged an enemy guard aiming an AK-47 at him. He then tackled another adult male who had darted toward the corner of the room. During the ensuing hand-to-hand struggle, Chief Byers confirmed the man was not the hostage and engaged him. As other rescue team members called out to the hostage, Chief Byers heard a voice respond in English, raced toward it. He jumped atop the American hostage and shielded him from the high volume of fire within this small room. While covering the hostage with his own body, Chief Byers immobilized another guard with his bare hands and restrained the guard until the teammate could eliminate him. His bold and decisive actions under fire saved the lives of the hostage and several of his teammates. By his undaunted courage, intrepid fighting spirit, and unwavering devotion to duty in the face of near-certain death, Chief Petty Officer Byers reflected great credit upon himself and upheld the highest traditions of the United States Naval Services. Medal of Honor recipient Ed Byers. A couple hero photos for you as well. That's about as cool as a Navy SEAL looks, in my opinion, right there. Getting ready for the fight, just in it. I cannot grow facial hair like that to save my life, so I also envy that. And then, of course, very few people walking this planet have this moment, and you deserve it. So, I'm going to offer up the first volley of questions. And as I move from this podium, I want to make sure that you guys can still hear me. Mic's still on? Yes? Okay, good. So I'm going to start with you, John. A vet-filled tour of duty in the U.S. Navy from 67 to 71. But you've seen the SEALs emerge over time, and you've followed them. What's changed the most, in your opinion, in the SEAL culture and community from the early days? You were there.
Well, first of all, I want to thank all of you for coming out. I know that you've been here a couple of days, and this is Saturday, and you didn't have to be here, but you volunteered to come, and I appreciate that very much. I want to say, first of all, that how many of you have seen the Titanic? Well, sometimes I feel like Jack, who's down in steerage. He gets invited up to first class. They eat with Rose and the rich people. Here they are. Anyway, the early days of the UDT was basically what you saw in World War II. We went through underwater demolition training. When we went to Vietnam, we did work with SEALs. I was down in the sea float, and we had 2 SEAL platoons down there, 1 UDT platoon. The CIA was getting intelligence, and they would pass it down through MACV in Saigon, and the SEAL teams would go out and do their particular operations. And our job basically was demolition. When the stream needed to be widened, they would invite us to go with a Mark IV and blow up the stream so they had more room to get the boats down. When a boat would sink, they would call us in to dive down and get the dead bodies, or they get the guns that were still left on the boats and so forth like that. But it was basically demolition. The SEAL team that was down there was basically what they're doing today. They had special operations where they would go out and with the intelligence to a village and capture somebody that was supposedly there working with the villagers that was high up in the Viet Cong arena. So anyway, these are the folks you need to talk to. But I want to say this. You saw the picture. I'm going to get out of the way because they got the good stuff here. And how many of you remember the 1960s? I don't think your parents do either. It's your grandparents and the fellow back there. Well, remember we were invaded by those British singing groups. They had all these animal names, the beetles, the birds, the monkeys, the turtles, the animals. The guys would grow their hair long. You know, they started back then. Girls wore flowers in their hair. We decorated up these little minivans. We drove off into the sunset. The theme of the day was, if you're not with the one that you love. Hey, you guys are smart. But anyway, the 60s was a unique time. And I joined the Navy during the 60s. And so in 1969, when we went on the Apollo 11 recovery, just before that, Apollo 10, one of the teammates, Mike Malley, had a flower decal that he put right on the window of Apollo 10 capsule. NASA wasn't real happy about that. And they told us no tomfoolery on Apollo 11. So the night before, Mike had all these flower decals. I was 20 years old, the lowest on the totem pole as far as rank. I wasn't going to be a career man, so they decided they were going to put them all over me. So we're out there on the rescue. My commanding officer wasn't really aware of it because he was in a different helicopter. He came in. He's a great guy, become the CEO of a UDT-11, but you can see in one of the pictures online, he's got the hippie sign too. So I'm on top of that capsule. It's 1969. Flower Power's in. We're right in the middle of the Vietnam War. We just got back from one tour, and we're kind of making a statement, I guess, you know, peace in the middle of the war crisis. And that's the story of the flowers.
Was it positively received by America, or was it you stealing our theme?
I'm here.
Chris Cassidy, Captain Chris Cassidy. You've covered a lot of ground as far as your career goes. But as far as the SEALs, what's the one thing people get wrong about SEALs? Either in BUDS you noticed it, or in the community, or out in combat? What's the thing that would surprise people about SEALs?
Well, first of all, good morning. Glad to be with everybody and echo John's sentiments appreciate your time sharing it with us today. But I noticed, to answer your question, I go back to what we call class up day, where you arrive with your class. It's going to start on Monday, and a couple days before that, in the week prior, you get together a class and shave your head. I imagine you did a similar thing, right, Ed? You shave your head. And girlfriends, wives, spouses are there. And I remember going home, and my wife was saying, well, did you meet so-and-so? That guy, he's going to make it. And I was thinking to myself, well, that person's going to make it. I don't know about that. Totally wrong. You cannot predict who will make it, because what you cannot see is what's in somebody's head and heart. And that's what makes a SEAL. And I didn't understand that when I was showing up at BUDS. I just thought it was all based on how much enemy push-ups you can do. But it's all about who you are inside that you can't see. So I think that's probably the one thing that people get wrong.
Now, does that translate later on? So as you watch in combat, so let's call that the ultimate test. A lot of folks in here are not going to be SEALs, but people want to be elite performers. They want to be on or leading elite teams. So when you take a look at when it goes right with the SEALs, because that's as elite as it gets, what typically do you notice? It tends to be this kind of mindset or personality or skill set. What is it that sets apart the crushed it Hall of Fame SEAL from other people?
I'm sure you get great answers from these other two guys, but I think that what we do in the military, not just in the SEALs, is train well and train effectively and think about ways to emulate a hard environment so that when you get to one for real, you're used to being in there. And it's just a thing of beauty to watch a SEAL element execute in that hard environment where oftentimes there's not a whole lot of communications going on because there's so much muscle memory and team knowledge from the training and preparation. I just think that that's what I think is so cool about high functioning units is just everybody knows what to do and nobody asks, do I got to do this? They just pick up the ball and run.
Master Chief, it seems to be the appropriate thing to call you, but Ed, is it okay if I call you Ed?
Sure.
You've obviously, we just read a citation about an elite performing SEAL team in the action, in the fight. And that was obviously an inspirational, heroic moment. But in our conversation, you mentioned that wasn't the most significant moment for you as a SEAL. How would you distinguish that from some of the other moments that you had that were significant?
Sure. So, interesting part about being a Medal of Honor recipient is that everybody thinks that's the most defining moment in your career or what you've been a part of. And for a lot of recipients, that's the case because of the battle they're a part of, maybe injuries that accompanied. But for ours, the mission went fairly well, and actually we executed it appropriately. Unfortunately, we just lost one of our teammates. But that mission was the most transformational mission of my life, but it definitely was not the most significant or proudest moment of my life of being a SEAL. And actually, that mission was about a year and a half earlier and was the rolling catalyst of how I ended up becoming a recipient, which is that story is for a different time, but it was being part of the bin Laden raid. And so it was the sole reason of why we had went to war, and the gentle giant had been awoken again, and why all these years we had been fighting, going after high-value targets, whether Al-Qaeda, other Al-Qaeda fraction groups, or the senior-level Taliban leaders, was we were there to find those that had caused 9/11, and that in particular bin Laden. And so while my role on that operation was small, the fact that I was actually there and got to be a part of this incredibly historical moment in our military and one of the most significant military operations, especially special operations that's ever been conducted, and what it meant to a nation was hands down the proudest moment of my life. I remember distinctly coming back from that op, and we were all stationed out of Jaybad or Jalalabad, and watching the president come out on TV, watching Americans from all over, gather together in solidarity and in unity and celebrating something that meant so many. It was a closure. It was a chapter in their life that they needed to have happen. And being part of that team, just being a cog in that wheel, hands down was the proudest day of my military career. And absolutely.
Yeah, what a mission to say you accomplished.
Sure.
It's one thing to be a part of it, but to have an undeniable success at the end of that. Chris, I'm a fan of stories and just in kicking things back and forth. One of the things I think we think about SEALs is teamwork, personified. And sometimes people aren't even talking and the teamwork's being executed. The training is playing out, but teamwork. There's a loyalty, there's a love, there's a discipline, accountability. You said the thing you learned about teamwork, there was a big lesson you learned under a ship in the Mediterranean. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so the first part of my career, I drove these little mini submarines called SEAL delivery vehicles, about 20 feet long, 4 feet wide or so. You're in the water when you're in them. And
You're launched from a sub, right?
you launch from a submarine, drive somewhere, and you do something, and you come back to the submarine. And we were doing a training mission in the Mediterranean in France, and my buddy Travis and I had a lot of time together in there, but the French Special Forces were interested in seeing our tactics and joining us, so they had their commanding officer right in between us, and it was really squished inside this small compartment. And it's nighttime, and we're showing them how you go underneath the ship, and then you have to, there's a lot of art to it. You have to stop completely and then add a little air so that you stick yourself to the bottom, the hull of the ship. And as we were going in, the French guy, observer, was wiggling all around trying to see everything. And as he did that, he grabbed his tank grabbed my hose, and right as we're going underneath the ship, my full face mask, the plastic part of the full face mask, just fell off. And so here we are at night underneath the ship, and there was really no way I couldn't reach over and grab my buddy Travis, who we had signals for to know what to do in that kind of situation. But he just sensed something was wrong, and right as I was, and again, because it was so cramped, it's hard to picture, but we have spare air in there, but I couldn't get it. And right as that was all transpiring and I was thinking, this is not good, this big hand just jabbed a secondary breathing thing right in my mouth, and it was my buddy Travis. And he didn't know why, but he just felt like something wasn't right. Yeah. And he kind of looked over. I think he even grabbed a chem light that was from somewhere, and he could see that I just had a face of water. And that was teamwork appreciation for me. You know, we had spent so much time together, and I don't know how to describe it, but that's the epitome of buddy system and taking care of each other and being there when you need it the most.
And you can't make that up on the fly. That's the product of, that's the outcome of a lot of time and effort spent together.
Right.
John, I'm always interested in this, your Apollo aspect of your career. So on the morning of splashdown, on Apollo 11, what was that like? As you're trying to get your head straight for this thing, you don't know how this is going to go. Eyes of the world are upon you. Space bugs are coming back. So what was going through your head on that day?
A couple months before we were in Coronado training, we had to train amongst ourselves. There was 3 teams that could actually rescue the astronauts. There was 3 of us that would put the collar around and the sea anchor and all of that. And then in Apollo 11, there was an extra man, and that was a biological isolation swimmer. His job was to scrub down the capsule. On Apollo 11, they landed on the moon for the first time. Nobody knew if there was any lunar pathogens that might spread amongst the population, so they had all of these procedures. Normally, we would jump in the ocean, free dive without a scuba tank on, but on this one, we had to dive in, jump in with the scuba tank on, and we had to breathe. They were watching us up above in a helicopter. The man that had the biological isolation garment on, his job was to, before he opened the hatch, to scrub down the capsule with this betadine, iodine, and bleach. And when the capsule was open, the astronauts were given these special big suits, biological isolation garments. They put them on, they came out, and then they also had to be scrubbed down. We were in close, lifeguarding and so forth. So the night before, we knew that there was going to be a splashdown, but they got orders. The ship, the USS Hornet, had to relocate that night 250 miles because of thunderstorms in the area. So the ship was racing to get to the scene. So everything was kind of chaotic. 3 helicopters lifted off the USS Hornet. Unfortunately, the capsule landed right near another group that looked like they were going to get in the water. We were the designated ones, so we thought we were going to miss out. But the capsule turned upside down. Buzz Aldrin was supposed to flip a switch that would jetson those parachutes, and his hand got knocked off, and so the parachutes with the wind knocked the cap, so upside down.
Leave it to a West Point guy.
Yeah. So it gave us a few minutes. Our little helicopter was the little helicopter they could. It was racing, just shaking like this, because the pilots wanted to be in there, and we wanted to be in the water. And the other team didn't want us to get there, but we got there, and they were told to move out of the way because the caps were just uprighted. I'm standing in the door. You know, I'm 20 years old, and I just, you know, out of high school, and I'm thinking, what in the world am I doing here, you know? Jumping in the water to swim up and look in that hatch window to see the astronauts that just walked on the moon. I want to say this, some of you guys don't even know why you're here yet. I have friends that were born, raised, and died right in the hometown where we were raised. We lived in Hawaii. There was people on one side of the island that were born, lived, died without seeing the other side of the island. So you never know what you're going to be involved in. He didn't think he was going to be a recipient of the medal that he's got. He didn't think he was going to be an astronaut when he first joined. I didn't think I was going to be rescuing astronauts. So you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Just don't get married. No, I'm saying. You're going to have a good time. Did I answer that?
That's great. That's great. And he said something that's very important. I want to make sure that you guys get this. When it comes to the Medal of Honor, you do not win the Medal of Honor. You know that, right? You earned the Medal of Honor. You are awarded the Medal of Honor. Okay? It's not a competition. There's a humility that you'll see in every Medal of Honor recipient that say they carry this on behalf of those who did not make it back. But you don't. You should bristle a little bit when you hear people say you won the Medal of Honor. This was earned in the most extreme of circumstances. I just want to foot stomp that. Now, you heard also about competition. And man, you got a bunch of alphas in this community, in the SEAL community. So the culture is one that, if not handled properly, especially by leaders, that can go sideways. That sort of power and strength and you're off the grid sometimes. Things can go south and the nation can be embarrassed. But when the culture is right, amazing things can happen. Obviously, you know, we talked about successes. So, Ed, with regard to the culture, when have you seen it absolutely done right? When this was the SEAL community at its best? Was it the Bin Laden raid, or what?
So this is going to be what I would consider as the backbone of any warrior. And it doesn't matter what branch you're in or what unit you're a part of, but it is the backbone of any warrior. And that's humility. And so the greatest, I think, definition of that humility is done by C.S. Lewis. And it's not thinking of yourself less, but thinking of yourself less often. Mm-hmm. And so with any warrior, you absolutely have, and fundamentally have to think that you're the best at what you do in the world because of the gravity of the job and what it requires. And where I'm going with that is, in May of 2011, like I just told you about, one of the most proud moments I was ever part of, the Bin Laden raid. Just a few months later, on August 6, 2011, I was part of the unit that had a helicopter shot down. And that helicopter was Extortion 17. And it ended up becoming the single biggest loss of life in special operations history. Now, there was 38 souls on that single ship helicopter, 30 Americans, a military working dog, and then we had 8 Afghanis a part of it. But when I look out into this crowd right now, and it's, an honor, and I love coming back to this one every single time, just because of what you guys represent and the future of our nation, is that it wasn't just SEALs on that helicopter. There was Army on that helicopter. There was Air Force on that helicopter. There were non-SEALs that were part of the Navy on that helicopter, which attributes to one of our soft truths. And it's that the majority of soft operations require non-soft support. And so where I've seen our community at its best is actually in the most severest of tragedy. And it was after that helicopter got shot down and happened to stand up 30 simultaneous, what we call Keiko teams. And so these are the teams that notify the families that they've just lost a loved one, that coordinates their funeral, and every logistical thing that was a part of it. And it got set up in my command in a room roughly this size, and it was manned 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for months as they tried to figure out how to move and coordinate these fallen soldiers that are coming back overseas. All the while, still maintaining operational focus to go after our enemies and not let that deter us from our strategic objective. But at our best was when our community was most hurt. And that really is where this sense of humility comes from, and understanding that, Kevin started out with the first stanza of our SEAL ethos. But it's the last one that stands out most to me. And it's that brave men have fought and died, building the proud traditions and feared reputations that I'm bound to uphold. And it's in the worst of conditions that steadies my resolve and guides my every deed. I will not fail. It's understanding that moments, that in those worst conditions, we come together as a team, that we put team before self. So it's team gear, your gear, then yourself. And when you think in that manner, you can do absolutely remarkable things, even when you've been severely hurt. Because it was a massive blow. We lost a third of our squadron in an instant. And it took a long time. It took nearly a year. I was part of the new group of guys that reconstituted that troop that we lost, which led into the mission and the next deployment of how I became a recipient of the medal. And so, but it's everything that we did was based on their legacy, these men's legacy, everything that they built upon. John has talked about. It's going back and looking at those who have been before you, and every single day waking up knowing that you have a standard to uphold. That's who I see when I look out into this room right now. Is that as you go forward in your careers and what you decide to do in life, is that you have to remember and always bring back in, it doesn't have to be, this is the way we did it, but remember all those that have fought and gave their life and built those traditions and reputation that you are now stepping on foot, that you are required to carry. So
I love that. And there's a legacy. You better feel the burden of that legacy.
Yes.
That's the reason why we say the long gray line, the long blue line. That others have paid a price, and it falls to you to not embarrass that and to advance that. People should look at you and never say, I thought you were better than that as a community. But to look at you in professional times and off the clock, to look at you and go, I thought so. I was hoping that was the case. You are that good. That's the profession you've joined. And that's the profession that these guys have helped elevate over the course of their career. So we got about 12 minutes. I want to open it up to questions for anybody. Well, this is good stuff. Man, this is good stuff. All right, got a question back here. Do we have a runner for mics? All right, back here. Loud and proud.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I'm Cadet Riley from Virginia Tech. My question is, with decreasing numbers of soldiers with combat experience in the military, how do you recommend, and how can we, as the future of the military, ensure that we are properly preparing ourselves to lead troops into combat if that happens in the near future?
You want to take it in?
Sure, take it. You can look at this panel and understand the ebbs and flows of being prepared for war, right? We had somebody from Vietnam. Chris, you came in during relative peacetime.
Yep.
Right? And then you probably did some other, off-the-book stuff during the 90s and things like that nature. And then 9/11 hit us out of the blue, and we thought we were prepared for something, but it took a couple years to get our operational capacity and efficiency to where we thought we were at. What ended up happening, this is the cyclical nature of the business that you're in, going to be in the military, right? You're going to get to a point where you're going to have your unit, and you used to have all these people that had wartime experience, and then all of a sudden they're going to be gone.
Right.
And so where does that corporate knowledge live? Where's that institutional knowledge? How does that live on? Well, it should live on within the SOPs that were created based on real-world experiences. But then it really just comes down to training. It comes down to train, and think of scenarios that as closely mimic what you can envision as being a wartime scenario and train into that. Preparing for the worst case scenarios, the most likely course of action, most deadly course of action, and developing multiple COAs and training against them. But at the end of the day, it's the cohesiveness of your team that's gonna carry the mail if you ever have to answer it or open that mail. And what do I mean by that? I think a lot of people, probably everybody in this room, has heard of, a bad plan executed well is better than a good plan executed poorly, right? Where does that come from? And so you can plan all day, but if you're not training to it, if you're not working out what's going to end up being the million kinks and the things that go wrong, when it comes time to execute that plan, it's going to fall apart and it's going to be disastrous. Or even if you had a bad plan that you had to execute in extremis or very quickly, as long as you had a great team dynamic that everything was built upon, you're probably gonna be superior and be on the winning side of that equation. Because I've never met a plan that actually was executed the way it was planned. It was pickup basketball, but we had developed such a high standard or a high baseline of what to fall back on, and you become an expert at the basics, and until you become the expert at the basics, you don't know what rules to break and when to break them.
What's the phrase? You don't rise to the level of your commitment, you sink to the level of your training?
1,000%.
Yeah, so that's what will be executed. All right, next question. Go ahead, right over here.
There's a mic coming. Here it comes, right here. To your left.
Alrighty, so obviously we know to be at that high tier operator level, you have to have your physical fitness up to standard and above the standard. My question for all of y'all today was, right here. How do you stay so mentally sharp when in that high stress environment you encounter? As a leader, you can be relied on and ready to be adaptable and overcome any event you experience.
All right, so Chris, how do you get your head ready for the oh crap factor?
Yeah, I think it's hard to stay at the top all the time. So at NASA, we have this is a big problem. You're up there for 6 months, and you have to have gas in your tank, and you're working a daily grind, and you need to know when you turn it on and when you turn it off, but you never entirely turn it off. And the foundation of that training for me was in the SEAL teams. I echo 100% what Ed was saying, that there's a certain level of comfort that comes from training and know that you're trained and prepared, and so are your teammates. And I think fear comes from uncertainty, and you eliminate uncertainty or at least tamp it down with quality unit cohesion. Again, these are the same things Ed was saying, and training and preparation. And so with those things and sort of big picture situational awareness, you know when you can dial the knob back a little bit and come off of 10 and come down to where you need to be, but always understanding that you instantly have to get back to 10 if you need to. So, and that's a challenging thing because as an individual, you might be off on a different cadence than your team. and that can get you out of whack. Or so there's lots of ways to answer that question, but from my own personal experience, I think it's very, very hard, unless it's a one-night mission or, it's hard to stay at that level the entire time, and that you need to understand when to give each other breaks, and that's why, basic security formations have somebody who has watch for 2 hours and then the other guy rests.
Good question. Good question. Over here, to the left.
Far side, coming up.
I'm doing this on purpose. I'm just pointing to the opposite parts of the room. Yeah,
Part of this PT.
that's it.
All right. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Cadet Jason Lerner from the Virginia Military Institute. And my question for you all is, a lot of us, like you said, aren't going to be the ones going to BUDS this summer, next summer, and graduating and becoming SEALs. And a lot of us are going to be going into more supportive roles in the military. Like, for example, myself, I'll be commissioning as an aircraft maintenance officer. So for you all that perform at such high level intensity all the time, I'm wondering if you have something that you tell yourselves to help you continue to perform at such a high level, or if there's something that you could maybe tell us that would help us continue to know how to perform at such a high level, even for any more universal jobs throughout the military.
You want to go, John?
Yeah, so outside of combat, how do you dial it up and stay focused?
When I was going through training, they taught us that they're going to show us that we could probably do 2 to 3 times as much physically as we ever thought we were going to do. It was more mental than physical, however. We had a lot of athletes that would join the teams or go through training, and some of them failed. It was more up here in your head. You had to kind of block off pain, put it in a compartment over here, and just act like it's not there. And not everyone can do that. But what I liked about the teams when I was in, you had your Westback tours, but when you came back, they always had more training. You go to C school, A school, B school, SDV school. They had porpoises. You would fly to Hawaii and learn how to play with the porpoises and all of that. There was constant training. And when I was in, we didn't have computers. And everything's evolved today. Everything's so complex. But one thing about the special forces of any branch, they're going to keep training you and training you and training you. But you got to make up in your mind, this is what you want, this is what you want to do, and don't look right or left. You're just going to go forward, and you're going to get the job done.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to piggyback off that. Leadership-wise, the leaders who have influenced you to raise your game, where you go, okay, I thought I was performing well, but I want to be like that, or I want to do that. Who was the leader for you, and what was it that made them special that you said that's...
Me?
No, okay. Let's start with Ed.
So, I mean, it was my team leader that he's one of my best friends now this day, but I served with him ever. To answer more specifically what you were asking is it's back to one of those soft truths again. The majority of SOF operations require non-SOF personnel. Look, we can't get to target if the aircraft doesn't fly, right? Aircraft's not going to fly if you didn't have a loggy somewhere figuring out how to get the JP8 fuel, on the ground there for it to function, right? Or to get the maintenance parts needed to get so you can work on it and make sure it's up and running. Is you have to understand what the mission is first, be aligned with that mission statement, and then understand you picked a job, that's what you want to do in life, and that's awesome. Be the absolute best you can be at that job. It doesn't matter if you mop a floor at night, take out the trash, running a Fortune 500, company, or in as you would think, as a support role within the military. Just be the best damn person you can be in that job, and just know that you are part of the machine. You are part of the machine that is required for our U.S. military to be the best in the world.
Thank you so much.
Well, let me conclude our panel. We unfortunately out of time. This is great stuff, amazing panel up here. And let me finish just with one more element of the SEAL Creed that I think echoes a lot of what you said. To be a part of the member of this community, it says, "My trident is a symbol of honor and heritage bestowed upon me by the heroes that have gone before. It embodies the trust of those I have sworn to protect. By wearing the trident, I accept the responsibility of my chosen profession and way of life. It is a privilege I must earn every day. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I ask you just help me in thanking our SEAL panel for today.